know about something that's happening that's pretty exciting that's happening in London this year. So the State of OpenCon is happening 2024. This is not paid or sponsored. Nobody asked me to make this video. I just wanted to let you know that it was happening. And if you're in the area and a tech individual, you might want to check out going there and seeing if you can't grab a ticket. So I had this fantastic conversation with the CEO of the Open UK, and here are the highlights. You can check out the link below and find some more snippets. I know that she's going to be one of the main presenters there and is a fantastic person to have a chat with. So again, hopefully I see you there next year, myself in person. But until then, here's those highlights. Check out the full conversation if you like. And until then, go check out the State of OpenCon. It will be a link in the description, and support them for all of their really hard work because they do a lot of really good work. Thanks, everybody, and see you around.
Do you know, I'm going to share this with you right at the start. Last year, the legal profession gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I can tell you it's not on my dating profile. There's nothing more aging than being given something like that. And I was worried because it's like, am I sick and nobody's told me? It's not something you give somebody in their early 50s normally, right? So I think it was focused on the work I've done in open source and in the dot-com boom back in the 2000s. And I was a lawyer from the actually from the 90s for 25 years, working mostly in companies. In 2008, I joined Canonical, which was a bit of an epiphany for me because I found open source proper, and have spent most of the last 15 years working in and around that. Had a couple of jobs that weren't open source, but stayed involved in the community and in governance. And then for the last almost 4 years, I have been the CEO of an organization called Open UK.
You've run some surveys yourself as well. That's one of the
Yeah.
main ways you reach out to
Yeah.
understanding. Awesome. So I am
So
going.
we've been doing that, Eric, for about 3 years, and we wanted to start to demonstrate what was going on in the UK. The questions that we've used for our survey, which we do annually, the main survey, are actually all Creative Commons. So if anybody's interested in that in their country, they can do it themselves. But we would also be happy to collaborate. And we do a call every sort of 2 to 3 months with people who are interested in research and open source. And anybody again can join that if they want to be part of that discussion.
Well, that sounds really, really awesome, and congratulations on
You
that.
think?
Well, I was going to say I'm going to congratulate you with speaking to politicians. That seems like somebody needs to do it, and I'm glad it's not me. I know that this is around the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA, as a
Mhm.
lot of people have talked about it. It seems very broad. And, the base root of the thing seems very good. We want to make our cybersecurity better, which all sounds really good. But I think one of the big things that came out of it, at least in the first proposals, was the lack of open source awareness. It seemed to think that all software was created by one group of people or one organization and released, and not different ways of developing software,
Yeah.
like in open source.
I think there is a fundamental problem. Well, I don't think, I know there is a fundamental problem across the world with tech and policy. So, our lawmakers, whether we're talking politicians or whether we're talking about people in the public sector of every country, are not deep tech experts, right? And there was a report issued in the UK last Sunday by Lord Maud, who was also responsible for the first open source first strategy anywhere in the world, which we had in the UK in our public sector in 2011, and who's a big open advocate. But he's been reviewing the UK civil service and talking about some major changes. And one of the things, I haven't read the full report, but one of the things they were talking about was giving people secondments into government and out of government, so that people in the tech sector could go in and learn about how government worked, and people in government could come into the tech sector. 9 months is never going to give you a full picture, but it give you something. And whether you're dealing with politicians or those public sector people, what you find is that they cover a multitude of different disciplines in the lifetime of their careers. So they move between different areas, and they might be doing fisheries and then ending up in tech. Any of us who've worked in open source, I'll put my hands up. It took me 6 months at Canonical to really understand what was going on around me. I had no idea. And I kept getting into trouble because I'd been taught to be a lawyer and to be protective of IP. And I was sort of unlearning everything I'd been taught. about collaboration and sharing and how to open something up and protect it in a different way where there is a level of protection, but you're going to allow people to use your stuff. And I can remember being irate about seeing people releasing things that I felt shouldn't be coming out of the company, that they were confidential, and having it explained to me why it was okay. So there's a big learning that anybody in that space has to go through. Or some of the politicians will have worked in business, not many of them. A few of them will have worked in tech, not many of them. And there are in the UK government some engineers. But you've got to imagine that these people are sitting around trying to fathom what they're regulating. So we have to contextualize it. And the problem I have is when you look at things like the CRA, to me, they're regulating it as if they're building a car, as if they're doing something industrial, where you're putting components together that you can disassemble and say, this is this person's, liability and responsibility. But it's not like that. And we used to use an analogy a lot talking about derivative works and copyright and talking about, the viral effect of copyleft. And we used to talk often about cooking and frying eggs. And if you put eggs in a pan separately and you take them back out, that's one thing. If you crack them and mix them together and make an omelette, that's what software is like, right? So it all gets mishmashed in together when you're explaining to people at the most basic level. And I think the CRA just doesn't understand that. It doesn't understand the real processes or the scale of what they're trying to take on in regulating software. Not just open source, but regulating code full stop. Who's got to enforce that? How are you going to do that? There are two things, cybersecurity and AI, that I wouldn't touch. And I wouldn't touch them because you have to be a deep expert and you're likely to cause more harm than good by dabbling in it if you don't know what you're talking about. So I was really clear on those. Last year, we started Open UK talking about cybersecurity and I had to engage. And this year, nobody has a choice but to talk about AI. And particularly because of the focus around open source and AI from the regulators. So it's been forced on me. So the big concern initially was, what does this mean for an individual developer? And what we've seen in the US and we've seen in Europe, and I think we will see in the UK too, is that they are trying to protect the individual developers and stop them being liable because they just released their code. I always describe it as a gift. So they gift their code to the world. Nobody has to use it. They choose to use it. I don't even know, sorry, I take that back. If you're the first to distribute it, I don't think it says for a commercial purpose, or it didn't last time I looked. If you distribute that software in the European Union, and distribution will include making it available, and in the internet world, that's like if you're putting it on YouTube and anybody can access it, right? I mean, there's an understanding gap. So that potentially could create liability. And I have been saying for months that what I expect to happen is what the companies were doing with TSU requirements around export control, where you would block your code going into a certain place. Mirrors pick it up and they put it in, and that's up to them, and you're not responsible for that. But I would expect people commercially distributing software or who fell under that commercial capture to end up blocking code going into the EU. And there's this whole, the law is the ass and ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So you have to know what the law is and comply with it. And then your license is secondary to whatever the law says. At one point, it looked like, and I don't know if this is still the case, it looked like you were going to be liable if you knowingly shipped code that had vulnerabilities. And that made me laugh because at the time there were X thousand vulnerabilities in the Linux kernel. And it's like, okay, so how are you going to fix that? What are you going to do? Rip it out of every server? Come on, I mean, it's just insane. But immediately they changed the word order in something and they were talking about commercial open source. And although it's used as a term, it doesn't really mean anything, right? Because all open source, you can use it for any purpose. So it's all commercial. And any commercial entity can contribute to a community project. So, and they just lifted and shifted wrongly. And I think perhaps we went in too hard and put their backs up instead of finding a collaborative way to work with them, where we've been coaching and helping them to understand and explaining, this won't work because, but if you can tell us what your end goal is, maybe we can help you to get there. And the end goal obviously isn't just making sure it's regulated. The end goal is that we're concerned about X, so we want to do Y. How do we get from X to Y? And I think most people, most engineers I speak to, don't want cyber vulnerabilities, they don't want security issues, they want things to work well, but they also don't want to feel that they're being imposed upon, um, and that they're having things forced on them. His surname's gone out of my head. There's a chap, Mike, whose surname is escaping me. He's one of the top contributors in the UK. And he wrote a brilliant blog post, which I will give you the link to, about how, as a maintainer, he has no obligation to you.
It is your baby, but that doesn't mean that everybody gets a say in in how you raise it, or you know.
Exactly. But maybe you take that baby analogy a step further. And I have to say, when I was talking to Mike, one of the things that really hit home for me is that I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to code. I make a lot of contribution to open source. I spend a lot of my life doing stuff way above and beyond what my job is and what I'm paid to do. And I have a similar problem where I'm asked to do things all the time. And, trying to get this call with me, I try to do everything that I can. But there are times where it gets overwhelming because there are so many people who feel this sense of entitlement. And I have no problem across the open source community, right? Because that entitlement is kind of justified. I've put myself out there. You're all entitled to what you want from me. But I find people who are sort of trying to understand open source now, or other organizations who want to advise government, think it's all right to demand things of me. And even more, they don't want to attribute what they get from me. And that really pisses me off because I come from that open source space where we build on each other's work and we acknowledge each other's work. And I do it all the time. I'm telling you about these people whose blogs or podcasts or whatever I use because they're good. And I build on that and learn from it. But there's an awful lot of society that thinks open source means you can come in and just take advantage. And it's not just the code, it's the whole ecosystem.
I have always tried to, like, if I talk about something that I know I've read in a book and it wasn't like fully mine, I try to bring it up.
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
one that comes off. I love Martin Klapman's book on data intensive applications, and so like there's things that I know that I've pulled from that, and anytime I talk on
Mhm.
them, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna mention his book
Yeah.
because
Yeah, we do a couple of things. So we do a lot of reporting. We've got a report on skills coming out on Tuesday. And we always have this massive, it's not, I'm not the owner of it, and she doesn't call it bibliography, but it is a bibliography at the end. And we acknowledge everything we've read, not just the things that we take quotes from, because those all help shape your thinking, right? And it builds where you end up. Right.
uh,
So, I mean, that kind of thing you need to understand who open source is, to understand how to regulate it. Because, I mean, I've been hearing people saying things like, oh, we have to ban it.
ooh, that's ooh, okay. I
I've
haven't
heard
heard
that.
that, but
Oh,
ooh,
I heard it.
I'm gonna have to
What
grunt
do you
on that
say
one.
to that?
That's
What do you say to that? 'Cause my temptation is to say, "Okay, go on, do it." And then you'll be really cold, you won't get any deliveries, you'll be really hungry, your TV won't work, you'll have no internet, you won't be able to access your photos in the cloud. I mean, there'll just be nothing. And I laugh because I thought, "Okay, now I'm getting the blame for that as well," right? It's just never ending, right? It's really important because you need the whole world there. You need everybody to participate, and it's the same for open source. I honestly think that there might be some opportunity for us on the back of AI if we can get governments to collaborate on the AI regulation, if they follow through on that and can be mature, hopefully that will cascade into open source and they'll start to understand that we are a global tech sector. We're not a geographic tech sector. And we need regulation that's simple. We need regulation that's agile and will flex, that small businesses and individuals, to the extent they have to, can comply with. And we need them to be thinking about how we work cross border, and they can't close that down because they've fallen out with a neighbor.
Open source in its concept is global, which makes this.
Mm.
I think that's what actually makes this more painful than it feels like it should be. To me, I
Right.
feel like a law in the EU shouldn't really affect me as somebody who just makes some educational content, but I do feel like possibly I should be worried.
Yeah, and I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this because I think the engineering development community don't necessarily get engaged enough. So I'm sounding like I'm contradicting myself, right? Because I've just said I don't think it should be all the engineers who are trying to deal with politicians and trying to deal with legal stuff because that isn't their bag. You wouldn't let me loose on code, quite rightly. So I think there is a bit where you need the right skills in place to be dealing with each situation to serve open source as well as we should be. At the same time, I also believe that the engineers should understand what's going on and that we shouldn't be siloed as the people that are, we're terribly important and we're doing this. It's not how it works. And when we set State of OpenCon up earlier this year, we had about 800 people in year one. We're looking to get to 1,000, 1,500 in year two in February. It's right after FOSDEM intentionally. So it's the Tuesday, Wednesday after FOSDEM for people who are at FOSDEM, because a lot of folks will travel once and not more. But what I want is to create that intersection, and it's what Open UK does. It sits at that intersection between technology and engineering and law and policy. So we have 8 tracks. We have technical tracks. We have a security track. We have an open source software track. We have a government law and policy track. And then we have a sweeper upper open source one, which is all the stuff like future of open source, paying maintainers, community, all the things that don't fit anywhere else. Anything, anything you've got that doesn't fit, put it in there. And we have 2 hours of plenaries each day. And last year on the cyber side, we were the first conference to put the White House on the stage.
So it's the State of OpenCon?
State of OpenCon, yeah.
And it's
hard to come
happening
up with
this
a name for
February.
another first conference. Forgive me. It's 6th and 7th of February.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Have yourself a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.